Chapter 10. They had a small, cluttered basement that was dimly lit by a single fluorescent bulb in the middle of the ceiling that we turned on by a string. It took us a little time to find it in the dark. Tony brought down Lynette while I struggled with Hank. Dill was close behind with some chairs I assume he found in the kitchen, though I never saw the kitchen myself. The basement seemed to hold all the sounds within its walls. It seems like the place they had probably abused Lizzie, for nobody around to hear them. Discovering this infuriated us more, so after we set them up on the chairs, we got right to work. And in all honesty, at first, we really enjoyed ourselves. "You don't know who we are," Tony began, putting a little gruff in his voice. "But we know what you've done." "What the hell are you talking about?" Hank asked, acting surprised. "We know about your part in the abuse of your niece," I chimed in, also trying to deepen my voice, but without as much success. "We would never hurt our little Lizzie," Lynette lamented in an almost believable tone. None of us believed either of them, and so we began to try and coerce them. It started off light, with a couple of slaps and punches, but it quickly went off the rails. Dill set up his phone to record the whole affair. I stayed on Hank, because as much as I hated both of them, I couldn't bring myself to punch a woman. Tony and Dill, on the other hand, seemed to have found no qualms in it. They let loose on her in the same way I struck her husband. Bloodied and bruised, they hung their heads in pain. However, they kept insisting not to know of what we were speaking. Even though they fought off the accusations, we had no doubts in our mind that they were lying. That is when Dill went upstairs for a moment and came back down with a couple of knives. Big, sharp, meat-slicing kitchen knives, that the sight of which made my heart sink. Dill tried to hand me one, but my hands were shaking so much I couldn't grab it. So it was he and Tony that continued the coercion without me. I would describe more of what they did, but I don't remember as I turned away a lot, unable to lay my eyes upon their actions. But the screams were terrifying, and when I turned to look again, they were missing parts of fingers and had cuts all over their arms and faces. "Okay," Lynette screamed out. "We did it! We did all of it!" "Shut up, Lynette," Hank said as blood dripped from his face to pool with more puddling by his feet. "It doesn't matter anymore, Hank," she answered back. "I don't want to die." As she continued, Dill checked his phone to make sure it was still recording. He nodded to Tony. "Say it," Tony demanded. "We hurt Lizzie on a normal basis," she admitted. "How did you hurt her?" Tony asked for more information. "We beat her, we humiliated her, and we abused her sexually." She turned her face away from us as she said the last part. "You son of a bitch!" Tony screamed out as he started punching Hank over and over again. "Stop!" Lynette pleaded with Tony, but only got a backhand in response. "You both deserve to rot in prison, and then hell for what you've done." He grunted out more before he said the words. We aren't the only ones that will rot in prison. Hank let out a little smile. What are you talking about, old man? Tony demanded an answer. We kept tabs on our little Lizzie and know she had 3 friends, Hank explained. And look at you. 1, 2, 3 of you. A smile grew upon his face. Do you think that when I tell them 3 teenage boys beat a confession out of us, that they won't figure out who you are? A small laugh escaped his mouth. Do you think that's true? Dill asked me and Tony. I don't know, I answered. We were very careful, but do you think they can link us here just by being Lizzie's friends? Damn it, Tony responded. I guess it's possible, but I hadn't thought of that. Pain could be heard in the laughs, coughing out of Hank, as they burst out more and more, through the blood covering his face. We could see a terrifying grin. You're screwed, boys, he coughed out. Then we will be brought in and will bring you down with us. Look, guys, I pleaded with my friends. We have the video. That confession will send them to prison, and we are minors, so we'll be fine even if they link it back to us. I said quietly to them as we huddled together away from Hank and Lynette. We could be tried as adults, Dill pointed out. He's right, Tony agreed. We have to take care of this, so it can't come back to us. He quickly approached the still tied up Hank and began beating him with his fists over and over again. Blood began to rain down the man's face as his wife screamed for Tony to stop. After hearing this, he quickly paused and then looked over at the woman. However, what followed was not what she had hoped. Reaching into his pants, he pulled out the gun we had seen earlier in the night and put the tip up against Hank's head. Do it! Hank forced out, past the realm of caring anymore. Pull the trigger, you little bitch! He shouted out with all he could muster. Tony stood there, hands shaking, unsure of what he was going to do next. This was not part of the plan, and we could see on his face that he was in well over his head at this point. Not that Dill and I were somehow swimming in familiar waters. It was just that neither of us was standing there with a gun in our palm. Seeing the hesitation in Tony, Hank began to try to free his hands. So much was going on that I don't even remember what was said, but Dill and I kept trying to talk Tony out of shooting the man. We all hated him, but Tony couldn't allow his anger to fade in the slightest. So when Hank was finally able to free a hand, Tony's rage finally shoved his hesitation aside, and he pulled the trigger. Covered in the blood and brain matter of her husband, Lynette began to scream even louder and more frantically. Fear was the most prevalent emotion I could see on her face, through the bits of her husband that poured over her. It all happened so fast, but we 3 appeared to move in slow motion. In shock, Tony backed away from the now lifeless remains of what was once Hank, and the gun trembled in his hand. The shaking was so much that he nearly dropped the gun a couple of times. He just stood there staring at it. I don't even know if he could hear me as I approached him to snap him back to reality, or if he could hear Lynette shrieking. "Shut her up!" I shouted to Dill as I slowly got the gun away from Tony. It was only a few seconds before Tony's eyes became less dilated, and he began to focus on my words and face. "Are you okay?" I asked, to which I got a nod. I think so," he answered. Though I was relieved to have him back, there was a new concern that had arose. The basement was silent. Dill was tasked with quieting down Lynette, but I still expected to hear whimpering or crying coming from behind me. But as my ears searched, they found nothing. Almost too afraid to do so, I turned my head to see what was happening behind me. There stood Dill next to the now dead Lynette, with blood pouring from the wide gash a few inches above her collarbone. Identical blood dripping from the knife held firmly in my friend's hand. "Jesus!" I exclaimed. "That's not what I meant, Dill." I'm sorry," Dill stuttered. I didn't know what to do, and she wouldn't stop screaming." His voice shook. Tears began to soak through his mask as he dropped the knife on the floor. "We have to go," Tony exclaimed. "Now!" So we did. We ran up the stairs and out of the house as quickly as we could, leaving 2 corpses behind in the basement, almost as if we expected them to somehow follow. Thank you for listening. I release new chapters every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. If you prefer to read, I do release all 3 chapters every Sunday on my Wordpress. If you know anybody else who might be interested in this story, please feel free to share. Thank you.